I can't believe it. For the third time this season, the Raiders have given up a 17-point lead in a game, this time to the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 2-win team that some would argue is better than their record displays. But at the same time, the Raiders should be better than their record displays, and they have been miserable this season. And there was a lot of expectations coming in. You sign Chandler Jones, you trade for Davante Adams, you bring in Josh McDaniels, one of the most talented offensive minds in football, one of the most well-respected offensive minds in football, and you're getting this result. 2-6. They're not even close to the playoffs. That should never be even a discussion this season from this point moving forward. They go against the slowly Colts team next. Obviously, they have their own set of issues, but the Raiders, they have a whole mess of them. And I don't know what their next move should be. Actually, scratch. I know what their next move should be. Get rid of McDaniels. It's clear this experiment is not working, and I think it's time to go in a different direction. I know we've kind of debated if that's the right move for them, if it's a talent problem, if it's a roster problem. You want to kind of like tell the people what you're thinking about this whole Las Vegas mess?
Yes, I'm glad that you articulated that, because yesterday you were bringing, when we were in our group chat, you were bringing that energy on McDaniels needs to go. And I am of the opinion that I could defend either decision for the Raiders. You could fire McDaniels or you could keep McDaniels. And I think that is defensible both ways. And in order to bring up the point that I believe it would be misguided to assume that McDaniel being the fall guy would be correct, I have brought some nerd stats to the table today. I have done my research extensively, and I'm bringing the nerd stats to this conversation here. So Pro Football Reference, which is like Basketball Reference, but Pro Football Reference, they have a statistic, and ESPN carries a similar statistic as well, that is expected win-loss record. So based on game situation, based on the amount of yards they convert per play and plays per quarter and stuff, they can figure out what the projected win total of teams will be. And it's derived from an algorithm that Bill James created for baseball. He's the Moneyball guy. And it's basically like points scored squared divided by points scored plus points allowed squared divided by some other stuff. But basically, it gives you an expected win-loss record. Last year's Raiders team had an expected win-loss record of 6.9 and 10.1. Which means on paper and based on expected outcomes, the Raiders were a 7-win team last season that happened to win 10 games and make the playoffs, despite the fact that they should have been expected to win 7 games. Last year's Raiders team finished the season with 21.9 points per game on offense and finished with my favorite statistic, DVOA, 19th in the NFL in offensive DVOA. This year's Raiders team has so far this year an expected win-loss record, according to Pro Football Reference, of 3.6 and 4.4, which means that they have been incredibly unlucky so far this season. And from the same statistics we're talking about, the Raiders this year have scored 22.8 points per game, which is 0.9 points per game more than last year's team. And their DVOA rankings so far this season, 18th in the NFL. 19th to 18th is the difference. The Raiders are the exact same offense this year as last year. And you can point to, well, they added Davante Adams. Shouldn't they be better? Yes. They have also not had Renfro and Waller for 5 games. That's another circumstance involved. But basically, the Raiders are the exact same offense, if not a little bit better this year than last year. If you want to go to defense in terms of points allowed, they were 26th in the league last year. They're 28th in the league this year. The Raiders are exactly the same team. And it's not that the Raiders are better or worse or whatever it is. It was they were incredibly lucky last season and incredibly unlucky this season. And that is the difference between the Raiders. They are the exact same team this year as they were last year statistically. Therefore, I think the problem is more roster-based than it is McDaniels being a good or bad coach. At the same time, they're a pretty average team, so if you want to fire McDaniels, whatever. It's not like he's a special coach anyways. The evidence suggests that this is not his fault. They are exactly the same team this year as last year. And you could say, well, they added Davante Adams and Chandler Jones. Shouldn't they be better on offense and defense? And I would say yes. But in the grand scheme of things, they are not, and the Raiders are basically the exact same team as last year, which is like a 7-10 team.
Okay, Kyle, I have one question about all those statistics you threw at me. What gets you into the playoffs, actual wins or expected wins?
I think that is not important when evaluating the quality of your head coach.
It is 100% important. And I will tell you the most important stat when it comes to evaluating your head coach. Have they blown 3 historic leads in 1 year? I have had an organization for 50 plus years and only had that happen 5 times. And you allowed it to happen 3 times under your command. And you could say McDaniels doesn't call the defense, but he does because he's the head coach now. He's not the offensive coordinator. He is responsible for the entire team. And even if it comes down to he's not hiring the right people, well, that's a head coaching problem. If you're not hiring the right people, if you're not bringing the right people into the building, if you're evaluating players wrong, that's not just on the GM. That's not just on the defensive coordinator. That's on you. And that's part of the responsibility you assume when you become a head coach. And that tells me that not one damn thing has changed from McDaniels in Denver to McDaniels in Las Vegas. They're the same guy, just 10 years difference, 10 years of just staying the same head coach. You would think that he would have grew in his time in New England, but honestly, he hasn't. And we ask questions all the time since Tom Brady left to Tampa about Bill Belichick and is he still recognized as the greatest of all time coach? When we look at McDaniels' resume as an offensive coordinator, now we have to question how much of that is fueled by, I don't know, having the greatest of all time quarterback under center for you for multiple years. And we saw last year, we got to see the first iteration of Mac Jones with McDaniels. It wasn't great. It wasn't anything special. We all recognized that New England wasn't that special. We go back to 2019 when the offensive weapons didn't really work out for Tom Brady over there and fueled his desire to leave to another destination. Or 2020 when we had the Cam Newton year and McDaniels and company had to work through that. It showed that the offense of coordinating was fine, but it wasn't spectacular. It wasn't what everyone praises and gets on their knees and talks about when they talk about Josh McDaniels, this savior of franchises, the savior of offense, Josh McDaniels, because that's kind of how he was built. And that's why fans and media pundits alike had expectations for this Raiders team. My thing in the offseason was telling you they just can't get worse. Record-wise, they just can't get worse. Because you added those pieces, you threw it as a throwaway, but you added 2 Hall of Fame pieces in Jones and Davante Adams to a roster that even if they were expected to get 7 wins, bottom line is they got 10 wins with an interim head coach in one of the most dramatic years in NFL history. They literally had their former first-round pick kill a person while their former head coach had a scandal unseen like anything in the history of the entire National Football League. And still that team managed to finish with 10 wins. This year's team has none of that. And they are struggling to beat the dregs of the league, struggling to beat Jacksonville, having a 20-point lead against Kyler Murray. And we'll get to Arizona at some point in our conversations. Give up a 20-point lead to them. And they have the talent. It's clear they have the talent because Rich Vespaccio and Greg Olson, the guys who were in the building last year, we don't think much of them, but they were able to motivate that team. And the players loved those guys. And they responded to those guys, which is half your job as a head coach. If you can get guys to respond to you. And it's clear, at least in the second half of games, people aren't responding to Josh McDaniels. He's not adjusting to the other team's adjustments, which is an indictment because if you're unable to counterpunch, then you'll never be able to counterpunch. I just don't see McDaniels getting better from this point to next year. So I would say don't double down in your mistakes. Don't believe in the sunk cost theory. Get rid of him. Get him out the door because I don't know who's on the other side. I can tell you that McDaniels isn't the answer if you're going to want to win a Super Bowl. And believe it or not, the Raiders, like any other franchise in the National Football League, do have aspirations of one day winning a Super Bowl. I can tell you, you're not going to do it with Josh McDaniels. You might not be able to do it with this ownership group, but you're not going to do it with Josh McDaniels. That's one thing I can.
He said the Raiders in the Super Bowl. He said the Raiders in the Super Bowl.
They have 3 to their name under Marc's dad. They can do it. It's been done before. Lesser organizations have done it. Jacksonville was in an AFC championship game a few years ago. And you're going to tell me the Raiders.
Let's start with a playoff victory. Like the Raiders haven't won a playoff game in 20 years.
Well, that's kind of more of the point. Is McDaniels the guy that's going to give them that playoff victory? I don't see it. I don't see him as that type of coach because First off, I don't even know if you can get a team to the playoffs now. It took a Tim Tebow holy roller miracle season to get him a playoff victory in his career that I just don't think we'll ever see anything quite like Tebow mania in its prime. And unless Derek Carr is going to start going to church on Sundays before the games, I don't think that that's going to lead to the turnaround.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Derek Carr actually is one of these super religious people. Just he does it very quietly relative to Tim Tebow being very publicly kneeling in the end zone guy. But Derek Carr is a big religion nut. This is the part where I will say I can defend firing McDaniel. The argument for firing McDaniel is that you shouldn't have hired him in the first place. That's the argument that you could make for firing McDaniel, which I can get behind that. Like, he wasn't like a super special guy who was available. I think we were all a little bit surprised when he got the Raiders job just because we thought he was going to stay in New England forever at this point. But the argument for firing him is he shouldn't have hired him in the first place, but I can get behind that. The bigger problem for the Raiders is talent. They don't have enough talent to be a playoff caliber team. They tried their best this offseason. I know you mentioned Davante Adams and Chandler Jones. The Chandler Jones signing, just chalk that up as a big ol' L. Like, Chandler Jones this year has like 5 tackles, 0 point. He has a half sack on the season. Like, just chalk that one up as a big ol' L. We shot for the moon. We missed. We traded Yannick Ngakoue for Rock Yassin just to clear a spot for him. That's just an L on our part.
And that's another thing. I know that Chandler Jones has mightily struggled in his first year with Las Vegas, but Chandler Jones is a guy that has been on bad teams before and has always been able to come through and be a double-digit sack guy. Is he really just falling off a cliff, or are coaches not putting him in a position to succeed? I know Max Crosby is obviously doing great. Chandler Jones, I just don't think that he dramatically became that much worse of a player. And again, that's just like, that's good. You put that on the defensive coordinator, but who hired that defensive coordinator? Just to go over something that I mentioned earlier, the sunk cost fallacy describes tendencies to follow through on an endeavor if you've already invested time, effort, or money into it. I don't think that the Raiders should, even though they've invested time, effort, and money into this. Honestly, if Marc Davis had his way, he would still have John Gruden as head coach, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. We'd still be in the middle of that 10-year mistake that he made in the first place. But
Seems to be a theme here. Seems to be a theme of mistakes made by Marc Davis.
I understand why you go after McDaniels. You said we were surprised by it. I think I was most surprised because I didn't think that McDaniels would have left New England, because you mentioned we just thought that he was just going to end up eventually as the head coach there. Eventually Bill's going to move on, and that's just going to be McDaniel's job to inherit because it's just a family business at that point, Patriot way. I thought when he went to another team, it was going to be because he obviously believed that that team had enough talent to make sure that his second run as an NFL head coach went a lot smoother than the first. And I think the Raiders are talented. Again, I think the biggest point of difference here is I think the Raiders are talented. I think that if you're able to get that level of performance you got with Rich Vespaccia as your head coach, then you should be able to do it with a guy that was getting praised, gets annually praised as one of the best offensive minds in football. And I'm not even seeing that result.
See, I think because I set the expectation much lower on the Raiders, it's not as surprising to me seeing the results. I thought the Raiders and Broncos would be like very clearly fighting for the 7th playoff spot in the AFC. And I thought the Raiders would be a little bit better, but as the Pro Football Focus expected win-loss record shows, the Raiders have just been really unlucky this year, but you don't need that stat to know that. They blew 3 17-point leads. Those are usually games that teams win, but they happen to have lost all of them. So like, they're unlucky this year and they were lucky last year. Look at how close the margins of difference are in the NFL. Yeah. Statistically, the Raiders are exactly the same team this year as last year. They might even be a little bit better on offense this year. But when you get lucky in one possession games, you get the 5 seed. And when you're unlucky in one possession games with the exact same team, you're like the 13th best team in the NFL. Think about how small the margins are in the NFL when we're talking about that.
Yeah. You know, I want to think about this too, how quickly this can really blow up, because if they do get rid of Josh McDaniels, which I think is the right move to do, I think that just get someone else in the building, anyone better. I just don't think that Josh McDaniels is a good head coach. And I think that you got to just try something else, because I don't think he's going to get better as a coach. Then you look at the next possible move that can happen, the next domino that could fall. Derek Carr's been in that organization a long time. Has seen a lot of coaches, has seen a lot of offensive coordinators. and we've still seen the end result is a failure to win a playoff game, which you've alluded to. At a certain point,
I guess,
you have to turn your head to Derek Carr as the common denominator, the thing that has stretched across time, that has been on all these teams that have fallen short, and specifically fallen short in big games. I go back to a couple of years ago. I remember them getting blown out by the Jets, traveling in cold weather when everything was going right for them. And that's been a constant theme throughout Derek Carr's career. And I know that next year, this offseason, I should say, they have an opportunity to move off of Derek Carr for a fairly cheap price. So that's not off the table. But if you move Derek Carr, then you have to ask yourselves, what did Davante Adams come to the Raiders to do? Play with his buddy, Derek Carr. So you got rid of McDaniels. You got rid of Carr. Are you now trading away Davante Adams, who you just invested this draft capital in? Because that's what the Raiders are kind of on a crash course for if they set off this chain of dominoes. But it might be the best thing for them long-term as an organization, because you've shown that you have a clear ceiling. You have a clear glass ceiling on this team. And if you can't break through it with these guys, you're never going to break through it. So you might as well just try something else. The craziest thing you can do is just doing the same thing over and over again and think you can get a different result.
I think the bigger conversation about what's the constant for the Raiders is more Marc Davis than it is Derek Carr, but it's not out of the realm of conversation either. I think we start with Marc Davis and then we work our way down to Derek Carr having just a ceiling as a quarterback, which is a tier 3 guy. Derek Carr is the threshold of the roster you put around him is the performance he's going to have. When they tore everything to the ground, he was 29th in the league in QBR. And that year they had Khalil Mack almost win MVP. He was 5th in the league in QBR. It's just kind of the deal with Derek Carr. And
I guess the thing I have to wonder with Marc Davis, is it bad process, bad result, or is it a good process, good result? Because I think the process makes sense to me, right? You have a quarterback who consistently is statistically, the stats say he's great. You have a coach that you hire, McDaniels, who everyone's saying, go hire this guy. This is the type of guy that you want to hire. Out of all the Belichick assistants, he was the one that had the least red flags. The people were telling you he hired McDaniels. Same with Gruden. People wanted him off TV for years. People were telling you, go after John Gruden, maybe not paying that much, but people were telling you to go after John Gruden. It made sense to at the time. Davante Adams, you're going to tell me going after a Hall of Fame wide receiver is a bad thing? Typically it's not. Or a Hall of Fame pass rusher in Chandler Jones. Typically it's not. So the process is not terrible, but obviously they're not getting the results that they asked for.
Well, so if you believe in the process, then you stick with McDaniel. The idea of bailing on the process would be bailing on him after one season. If you believe in the process that you've put forward, then you stick with what you have at this point. The difference is, I don't know if they've set the expectations too high for themselves. Because again, this is a team that on paper won 7 games last year, according to the expected win-loss record stat, and is on a similar type of course this season. So you can get better players. You can improve the roster on the fly. It's just they have their own draft pick this year. It's not like they don't have the pick that they gave up for Davante Adams. You can build something. It's just, do you believe in the process that you're on right now? Because the reason I said at the very beginning, before listing off all those nerd stats, was I could defend the decision either way, is tell me what the plan is. If the plan is we're going to fire McDaniels and just hire another guy and keep the roster the same, well, that's stupid. You're just trying to guess on getting who the next great prodigy coach is. But if the strategy is we're going to get rid of him and we're going to make roster changes for better or for worse, maybe that's trading the quarterback and going down in the draft a bit. Maybe it's taking a quarterback this year in the draft. Maybe it's going to the free agent market like Atlanta or Seattle did. Just tell me what the plan is, and I could probably defend it. That's the thing that's more important than the decision itself.
I mean, if I told you the plan was Sean Payton, and regardless of your opinion whether Sean Payton's taking the job or not, if I told you the plan was Sean Payton, is that not a better plan, do you feel? At least someone with a proven track record as being a head coach that Payton has.
Is it Sean Payton and run it back with the same team? Is it Sean Payton use the first round pick on a defensive player, maybe sign some more defensive players and run it back that way?
I think that's an obvious fix, right? You want to fix the defense. That's fine. But as far as overall roster construction. Obviously, if you could keep Davante, great. You may have to fix something on the offensive line. I know they got some contract stuff that they'll have to work out with Josh Jacobs as well. Hunter Renfrow, they just extended Darren Waller, and you'll want him healthy because Darren Waller signed that big contract and then went Michael Thomas with it. When it comes to Sean Payton, if he inherited this roster, do I think that he would be a needle mover at head coach as opposed to McDaniels? Answer yes.
Yes.
Because I've seen Sean Payton do it. Because Drew Brees, I mean, we all love Drew Brees and think the world of him and think of him as a Hall of Fame quarterback. But his career was floundering, coming off the shoulder injury. We didn't know what was going to happen with Drew
Sean Payton's
Brees.
going to walk into the Hall of Fame. Sean Payton is one of those like 8 coaches that actually does move the needle. And we know he moves the needle because of what he can do offensive schematically.
So if you told me you gave him someone with Derek Carr's skill set, because skill set wise and tangible wise, Derek Carr has things that you would want your NFL quarterback to have. He has a hell of an arm. He can make every throw. He has a little mobility, more than people give him credit for. Pocket awareness. Derek Carr has a lot of things that you would typically attribute to a quarterback that you'd like to have on your roster. And under John Gruden, we did see him take steps in the right direction. And then we saw him take steps in the wrong direction as John Gruden got fired and they had to move around the offense. Obviously, the Henry Ruggs incident happened, another hit to that offense last year. If I take that Derek Carr in a vacuum and give him the right coaching, give him Sean Payton's coaching, that system with the New Orleans Saints that made the New Orleans Saints one of the most exciting offenses in the National Football Leagues for over a decade, then okay, I think that would be the right move because I think McDaniels, it's just clear, overrated. We've seen it twice. Same result. What's the old saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, George Bush. You shouldn't be fooled again.
Yes. I think the thing with McDaniel, at least from the evidence I'm seeing and the nerd stats I listed, but like he's just another dude. And just another dude is sometimes fine. At least it's not total instability like the 5 coaches who are about to get fired this year. Like just another dude is fine. And if you believe in the guy that you hired, he has not done a job that merits firing. Like based on the evidence, he has not done a job that merits firing. But if you didn't believe in him in the first place, I understand getting rid of him at the end of this season. It's not like he's totally unfireable. And if Sean Payton is available, yeah, that's probably a good reason to move off of McDaniels. It's a good reason to do that because Jim Harbaugh, they had that chance last year and they didn't want it. Like I don't think that
Jim didn't want it, but Jim has another chance to go back to the college football playoffs. Maybe if the result is still the same, Jim is a little bit more open to the idea.
Anything with the Raiders often comes down to damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because like I think Sean Payton will make that offense better. I don't think they'll be better than the Chiefs. They would have to make major personnel changes in order to do that. But it might make them as good as the Chargers in the year 2 of Sean Payton. Like if that's the plan, but they need to make broader personnel moves. Because again, this is like a 7-8 win team on paper. And they tried to get better. And it hasn't worked. Like tough shit. It hasn't worked. Like Chandler Jones chalked it up as an L. Davante Adams should make your offense better, but he's on pace to put up 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. And guess who had that stat line last year? Hunter Renfrow had that exact stat line last year. So like they are the same team this year as last year. And I think the ceiling on that starts at the quarterback position, but goes to the broader roster at large. Because part of paying Derek Carr $35 million a year is you can't afford any good defensive players.
Let me ask you this question here. If I told you could have Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo, who are you taking?
Depends on the money.
No. I'm just telling you. Jimmy Garoppolo or Derek Carr, who are you taking?
Are they making the same amount of money?
I don't care. Just answer the question.
Well, because this determines the situation.
Just answer the question.
There are other circumstances.
Okay, you have a big game to win. Who are you taking?
Is Derek Carr and let's say Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo are both making
around the question, man.
I need more information.
No, I'm asking you right now. They're both cost $0.0. They're both,
there you go.
They're both free.
Okay, that's a different question. If they're both free, it's a push. Just give me a coin toss. I'm fine with either.
Oh my God.
If you're really pinning me down, I'd go Derek Carr. But if you gave me Jimmy Garoppolo, I'd be just as fine with it.
I'll take it. I'll take that as answer. Okay, if Derek Carr you believe is better than Jimmy Garoppolo,
I don't. They're the same. They're the same.
The reason I say that is because Jimmy Garoppolo can at least get you to a Super Bowl. If Derek Carr is in theory better than him in ability, then shouldn't Derek Carr still have the ability to do that same result? So,
well, I mean, yes, if you gave him the 49ers, if you flip Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo on the 49ers, yeah, Derek Carr would look a lot like Jimmy Garoppolo. Yes, I do believe that. He would have a Super Bowl appearance and an NFC Championship appearance and maybe 2 Super Bowl appearances if you put Derek Carr on the 49ers. I do believe that. But
okay, well, then that gives a little more context there. Cool. Thanks. All right.
Yes, I would say Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo could do the same job. Derek Carr's been cursed to the hell of the Las Vegas Raiders organization, and Jimmy Garoppolo has been supported with the beauty of the 49ers.
See, I might disagree with you. You know, if I had the same choice, I might take Jimmy Garoppolo because I've at least seen Jimmy Garoppolo win playoff games.
Totally fair. They're basically the same.
The reason, of course, for me asking the question is to understand how good you think Derek Carr really is if he was given an ideal situation. If Sean Payton is an ideal coach, then that would transfer to turning the Raiders into an ideal situation in theory. Vis-a-vis, Derek Carr would be a quarterback that you, in theory, could go to a Super Bowl with. That
with a much better team. Yes. They would have to add Sean Payton plus major roster overhaul to get to a Super Bowl point. But theoretically, yes, Sean Payton is the first step on the path to building a team that could compete with Kansas City. I mean, the first step is getting to the Chargers because they're still a good ways behind the Chargers. So I don't even think Sean Payton is enough to close that gap entirely to get to the Chargers. I think they would need to also make roster moves around that in order to get to that point.
I don't know. I think Pete Carroll has shown the world what good coaching can do for a team. But anyway, guys, that's enough Raiders talk for me. Let us know below in the comment section what you think the Raiders should do with head coach or soon to be non-head coach Josh McDaniels. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all social medias, follow us on all streaming platforms. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. From Ledbetter Ju-Ju, we will see you next time.